All right, I am back for part 3, my birth story, a painless birth, and a lotus birth. So remember, there is part 1 and part 2. I forgot to put a trigger warning in part 2, so I will remember for this. I've been recording them back to back. I just had to have a little lunch break because I was talking a lot for part 1 and part 2, and now I'm back getting this done and finally out there. So this is my birth story. It was a positive experience, and I will put a trigger warning on that. On this, I mentioned it in part 1 that positive birth stories, I'm well aware, can trigger people, activate you, make you a little bit upset. So I am giving you plenty of time to just tune into yourself and decide whether or not this is something you want to continue to listen to. Positive birth stories often don't get shared because of the shame people can feel around it. But the reason I'm sharing this is because I wanted to hear people's stories. I wanted inspiration. I wanted to hear how people had done things, not to copy them, but to just get ideas. The reason I had a lotus birth is because my friend Anne Williams shared with me that she was having a home birth and a lotus birth, and I was curious about it. So I'm going to share about that today and how it was that I came to experience a painless birth and the things that I did do and embody and embrace to get there. So if you're not ready to listen to this now, maybe in the future it'll be something that you can listen to. If you are listening to this and you have a friend you know is searching for positive stories to listen to, then please feel free to share this. And I'm open, I'm transparent, I'm just accessing all of the memories from my brain. This is a documentation for myself, and hopefully one day Violet will listen to this as well. So yeah, I'm just going to be open and transparent. I don't have a filter a lot of the time, but I want you to take responsibility. You're an adult, to make decisions for yourself. Make decisions not because I did it, but because it feels good for you. Okay, so I finished off the last podcast episode. They kind of abruptly finished because then I realized I'm talking about the next part. But I said that I would try and find a piece of paper where Gav was documenting all the times and things that were happening, because I didn't want to be aware of the time and put myself under any pressure or expectations. But I can't find that piece of paper. I always find it when I don't need it. And now that I would like to look at it, I can't find it. So this is, I think I finished off at around 11 o'clock when things were getting a little more intense, and we called our midwife to let her know what was going on. I'm going to talk about some, just so I can anchor in and get my thoughts organized, herbs that I had prepped myself with, the environment that we had set up, and also a little bit about the postpartum period, and then, of course, about the lotus birth itself. So before we even get to this stage of having a baby, birthing her, is that all of these intentions were set in a birth story, in a birth plan. So when I'm working with clients, from early days, I'm getting them to set intentions of how they want their birth to be. Some people are like, oh, I got pregnant, and then that's it. It's like, hang on, there's a whole pregnancy. And then a lot of people will say, gosh, everyone plans for the birth, but they don't plan for the 4th trimester, the postpartum period, once the baby is here. So I did have a birth plan, and it was a lot of detail. I think it was a couple of pages, 3 pages, maybe 4, around how I wanted to have this home birth and a lotus birth, what level of interventions I wanted, when I wanted herbs introduced, because I had a stock of herbs, which I'll share about. And I did have a plan around if we had to go to hospital and what would happen with us if we were to go down the C-section pathway, because I'm not ignorant to the fact that things can go any which way. And the biggest thing that I see with women who have had C-sections, who have birth trauma from it, is that it wasn't expected. So the feminine wounding of disappointment comes in. So I did have a little bit, but it was only a small paragraph in there. I did have something around the hospital, but it was only a small paragraph. So this is something I encourage you to do. So this is sharing, but it's also teaching what I've learned and how I've helped my clients in the past. Now, there are some people who have C-sections. There's no birth trauma around it. They've planned, they're okay. And I want to just preface that I've worked with many women who have, we've worked together and they have planned to have a C-section. And I'm not there to say that natural birth, vaginal birth is the only way. And I don't want to make you feel guilty at all. It's about how can you feel comfortable and in your power with the decision that you've made. And sometimes it's not until after the fact that we realize we've got stuff to process. Some people have a vaginal natural birth. It is all good in people's eyes, other people's eyes, textbook birth, no physical tears or anything like that. And yet they have trauma. And this can be, to give you an example, that their partner is just not present. The doctor said something horrible to them and it just set them off in this cascade and didn't allow them to get into their body. So it comes in all shapes, ways and forms. It's not always what you think. And I realized from working with people that they thought their trauma wasn't bad enough, but trauma is subjective and it's anything. It can be that the babies go to NICU and you don't actually get that skin to skin that you desired. So we had that in our birth plan as well, like maximizing skin to skin time. If anything was going to happen to me, then Gav would have the skin to skin time with our baby. So I also had some herbs. So I was a practicing herbalist. I got to work with an amazing herbalist, kind of sit in and pick her brains when I was in Tasmania. Her name's Lucinda Booth. I don't know if she's still practicing. But also from my experience, I put together 6 herbal blends. And one was a pregnancy tincture. And I don't drink alcohol, so I would often tell women, it's like, if you want no alcohol, then you have to know that this has got an alcohol tincture. Otherwise, you go for pregnancy teas. But I like strong. So I had pregnancy tincture to tone my uterus, help support that process before having a baby. Then the next one was a homeopathic blend with colophyllum, which I intended to take from 40 weeks. I've had amazing results with induction treatments with women. It is one thing that I really miss as an osteo, because it wasn't just about sticking the needles in and giving people herbs. It was about the chats that we would have about the fears and how supported they felt as well. Then I didn't need to, no, so I used that. Violet was born at 38 weeks, so technically early, but she was on time. I used that from the time my contractions started to help maintain them. And there's a certain dosage and everything that you take. I won't go into that during this. And then I had next in line, the third mix was just in case. I'm always like, I like to be prepped, and if I don't have to use it, great. But it was a herbal blend to help the placenta release naturally. And I didn't need to use that. I'll talk about this as I go through the birth process. The next one was a bleed stop blend to make sure that any postpartum bleeding, which is normal for about 6 weeks, that was stemmed and stopped within 6 weeks. And then I also had an emergency small bottle of milk flow to help if I had any issues with milk flow. I'm going to talk about these as I go along. And then I had what I call liquid gold. It was something for mastitis relief. And that has been so amazing to use with women. So the midwife, we called the midwife, and it was 11 o'clock and things weren't uncomfortable. It was like, oh, there's definitely sensation there. And yes, I was really calling on my Vipassana of this is sensation. And I remember saying that to myself, this is sensation, this is sensation. I'd also learned a lot with my osteo, and I think it's a bit of a wives' tale, but I believe in it, is that the jaw is very closely linked with the cervix. So obviously the cervix wants to dilate when you're having a baby. And people say if you hold tension in your jaw, then the cervix doesn't dilate. And this is where I do believe I experienced a primal birth. I definitely experienced a ecstatic birth. I wouldn't say it was orgasmic, but it was very satisfying. And I was very conscious of, and I said to myself, like, loosen my jaw. And I was doing this, if you're watching the YouTube version, I was like loosening my jaw a lot. And that's something I used to do on women for induction treatment, is like get into their jaw, release it. And I was making sound as well. And the sounds were coming from somewhere else. And that's where, again, if I relate it to some other women, I've had some beautiful conversations with women approaching their second, third birth by asking them, did you make sound? Did you hold back because you were worried that you would disturb other women on the ward? And can you release? Most people hold back because they're so worried about other people. And it's like, this is your experience. So anyway, I let it rip. Then I remember thinking, because I'd read books mindfully, but I was waiting for that transition when you're meant to be 10 centimeters dilated, and that feeling of wanting it to be over, feeling over it, wanting painkillers. And that never came. But I remember, I was on the toilet a lot, and it was like, oh gosh, but that often happens. Just emptying the bowels. But I remember at one point, we wanted, I ended up moving to the spa, so asking Gav to fill that up. And what was amazing is he was just at my beck and call. He would just do whatever I asked. And so I felt incredibly supported. All the Michelle O'Dent stuff that I talked about in the first and second episode, I believe, was all about the environment of the birthing mother. And that's why I think it's so important to have a plan, because you go into your primal brain when you're in labor, and there's a whole cascade of hormones that happen when things aren't intervened with. And when you have to answer a question, it brings into your prefrontal cortex, I believe, and that takes you out of the primal state. And it's all about letting the cascade happen. So Gav was on board with my plan. He knew exactly what to do, when to introduce the herbs, etc., so that if there was any questions directed at me, he would answer them for me, unless I felt like I could. But I was in the space of like, I'm just going to do my thing. So we had dim lights, we had a salt lamp on, and it was all about producing the environment. Actually, I forgot to mention in the pregnancy podcast that mentioned it in the first part, that we knew that when we had the baby, we wanted to cocoon ourselves for a period of at least 10 days. We also knew that we wanted to bond with this baby and not have certain smells, other people's smells. We didn't want her passed around, which is kind of the benefit of a Lotus birth. And we wrote a letter to my parents, just communicating this request for them to read. Not because I didn't think I could talk to them, but I thought this is just a nice ease in. And we didn't leave it to 1 week before having the baby. We gave them plenty of notice to digest and for us to have discussions. And it went along the lines of, when we have the baby, we don't want to be disturbed. We don't want you to come and visit, but we were in their house for 48 hours. Because we just wanted our baby, Violet, to bond with us and our smells and not be passed around. I feel like I could do a part 4 on the postpartum period as well, as I'm talking about this already. Anyway, they were amazing and they respected that. I think my parents are both pretty accepting of things. Gav had to communicate to his family that we're not going to be calling them in the first 10 days. We're not going to be on the phone and sending photos and all this kind of stuff. Our phones were going to be off. Of course, if we changed our mind, we could change our mind, but it's just pre-framing that this is what we wanted to do. This is what felt good to us. So yeah, all of that environmental side of things, which meant that the towels, if we were going to use towels with our baby, they weren't going to be fresh, clean towels. They were going to be the towels that we had used. I wasn't going to rush and have a shower after the birth, because I wanted to spend time with my baby. Anyway, fast forward, it's taking my labor prep herbs, the calophyllum, the homeopathic. Things were moving along. I had no concept of time, and then I vomited. Actually, that's when I called the midwife. I said to Gav, can you call Martina? Because I vomited, and it was just like this nervous system reaction. And I wasn't eating much for most of the day. It was like oranges and blueberries. So that all came up. And on reflection, this is when I went into transition. So I think it was around 1 o'clock, our midwife arrived. and things were still feeling good. And I think she had to travel about 40 minutes, but she arrived, she came into the room, and she knew part of the plan was that I didn't want her there. So she said, I'm just going to leave. And then I said, no, you can stay. And so it wasn't a conversation. She just stayed. I didn't mind her being there. And I remember at some point saying to her, how far away do you think I am? Because I'm like, I haven't reached this transition point. I haven't felt over it. I'm not asking for the painkillers. How close do you think I am? And she said, I think your baby's almost here. And I was like, what? Are you serious? Now, in the meantime, when I was having contractions, I would be very vocal. It was very deep groans, loud noises. And then I would fall asleep between the contractions. And also Gav knew some acupressure points. There's Deborah Betts, this Wellington midwife who's got some beautiful points to use, but I couldn't handle them. I just said, can you just stroke my tailbone? That's all I want. So I think there's a degree of flexibility and adaptability that's needed in the moment, because there's only things that we can think, and then in the moment it feels different. So I loved that Gav was super supportive, and we will often reminisce about how supportive he was in this birth, and it's a really nice story for us to recount and share. So yeah, she said, I think you're closer than like your baby's almost here. And she said, do you want to check? She was so respectful, because I was like, I don't want fingers up there and checking. So she said, just pop your hand down. And I could feel Violet's head there already. And I was like, holy cow, I've gone through transition. She's almost here. What? Then, of course, it's like the hearing of the ring of fire. And I was like, ugh. But yeah, relax my jaw, relax, breathe. It's coming. She's coming. I would talk to Violet. We didn't know she was a girl at that time. It's like, just move down, come out, you're safe. I remember saying these words and not caring about what other people thought. So she did not just crown and sit there. She shot out in one go. I do remember having the uncontrollable urge to push. If anyone told me to hold back, I wouldn't have been able to. It's like, get out. So she shot out with her hand on her head and all in one go into Gav's arms. So I was kind of like leaning over the side of the bath, the spa bath, into Gav's arms. And then I kind of like, I didn't want to hold her straight away. I was like, oh my gosh, that was intense. That was amazing. It was never painful. It was fully just sensation. But it's like, wow, she's out. And Gav was there just holding her. And then I got to sit back and I was losing some blood. And what I'm really grateful for is that I got to stay in the bath, because I heard that you're not meant to give birth to the placenta in the water. But this is what I loved about my midwife at the time, is that she just listened to me and she let me. And then I was ready with my placenta release herbs. And she said, no, just give your body 30 minutes. And then, if not, then you can take the herbs. So I didn't have to touch them, but they were there if I needed, because I didn't want the Syntocin injection. Again, like, just know that you can make choices. And then I felt quite faint, probably because I was losing a lot of blood, and then adrenaline rush, getting cold, which is kind of normal. It took me ages to get out of the bath. So Gav, and then I was a bit freaked out. She's like, oh, just tug on the placenta a bit. And I was like, oh, don't do that. But anyway, she said, just cough, just push out a little bit. And the placenta came out really easily. It is amazing to look at your placenta. It's, I think in hospitals they just get bagged up and thrown out. Look at the placenta. And now I'm talking, I really do need to do a postpartum part 4. So that will be coming. And I felt quite faint. So actually Gav ended up holding and bonding with Violet for about 40 minutes. And then I kind of like rolled out of the bath and it's like, oh, I cannot walk. So I just lay on the ground, covered up for quite an amount of time. And we had this little plastic strainer with a placenta bobbing around in the bath as well. Gav got that really quality time with Violet and he loved it. And then we found out she was a girl. I don't know when we named her, but Violet is my favorite color. And so she's named after the color violet, and Gav decided to call her Violet. I don't know if we decided that before or after, Anyway, Violet was here. She had a full head of hair and she was very alert and she was a very cute baby when she was born. And yeah, it was just really cool. Like, I cannot imagine having to get up and have a shower, like that whole thing of thinking women being dictated to. And yeah, I was ready to go to the bedroom, but my gosh, I needed help to walk down the hallway to get to the bed and just kind of flop there. I think by this time, it was maybe anywhere between 3 and 5 a.m. But if I look back, I feel like I was only in the sort of intensities of it, not pain, but intensities of making the sound and everything for about maybe an hour or two. And as I said, it's like I only kind of asked something when her head was down. So in reflection, it must have been when I vomited that I reached that transition and was like, call the midwife, call Martina. I love that my mum didn't come and interrupt. Like, she respected those wishes, and my dad as well. They definitely would have woken up. Don't know if we told the neighbours that we were going to have a home birth, but no one seemed to complain. And yeah, it all went really well. So we had the lighting, Gav was really supportive, and this was all sort of mapped out in our plan. Obviously, I didn't know that I would kind of feel really out of it for 40 minutes. I just felt faint, where it's like, I don't want to hold my baby. Just like, I just remember thinking, gosh, she's so cute, and oh my gosh, she's here, and they're so tiny. We don't often get to see newborns. Yeah, so she was born just over 3 kilos, I think 3.6 kilos at 38 weeks. Came out really easily, hand on her head, one shot. I did get a little tear, which I would have to say that was my biggest fear. And I will add that into the postpartum part 4, which is now coming as I speak. I remember, and for those of you who've done the release course with me, I talk about the doshas, the Ayurvedic doshas, and my daughter is a pitta, so very hot constitution child. So am I. And yeah, we had plans to cloth nappy, which we did. And I said, oh, can she just sleep in the nude? Because we just really wanted that skin-to-skin contact, and she fed and latched well, which is great. And she said, well, the rule is that baby should have one more layer on than you. So we were sleeping in the nude, and she's like, well, you should stick a nappy and a singlet on her. And I was like, really? So we did it, and she woke up crying, bawling her eyes out hysterically, and very hot and sweaty at some point at the night. So we ripped the singlet off her, and it was like, yeah, no singlet. So again, listening to yourself, some people I know would probably just go, no, the midwife said they've got to have one layer on, but my baby's sweating and it's red and it's distressed, but I'm going to keep the singlet on. It's just, really like, can you think for yourself a bit? Can you listen to your baby even though they can't communicate? They are communicating, just not in English, in a way that you can understand. The placenta. Sorry, what did we do with the placenta? Lotus birth. I feel like I'm rushing a little bit because I know that I've got to leave in about 10 minutes to pick up Violet. Is the lotus birth. Why did I choose to have a lotus birth where I keep the placenta attached? It was my friend Anne Williams, and I just thought it was really beautiful. I felt like it was her spiritual teddy bear that she had grown up with, so why would I separate her? There's a lot of research and things have changed where people do the delayed cord clamping. I'm like, well, why not let it just drop off naturally? Why create another wound where bacteria could get in? And yeah, she's grown up with this thing. Some people who have told stories say that, the baby lets out this cry when you cut its umbilical cord. And then I was torn because it's like, well, maybe I should do placental encapsulation, but I've got to do it within 24 hours. So it was more important for me to keep the placenta attached than to consume it. But I did have a bit of FOMO, so we cut about a teaspoon size, and that was chopped up and put into smoothies over 7 days because didn't want FOMO of the benefits. But yeah, it was like a spiritual teddy bear. And in the book Lotus Birth, which I talked about, there was a cranial osteopath that said that they stopped feeling the cranial rhythm or the pulsation of the placenta 4 days after it was born. So does it still have life to it? Who knows? It was amazing on so many levels. So the length of time it takes for the umbilical cord to detach from the baby, the placenta to attach, depends on the climate. So I've had friends where it's detached after 3 days when they're in a very dry climate, and then up to 10 days if they're in a more humid climate like Brisbane. It's all very subjective. Violet's took 5 days, and actually our midwife was the first person to hold her after it detached. It was just before an appointment, postpartum appointment, which is the first time we saw her after having Violet. And it was fascinating because you could clearly see the 3 vessels that went from the umbilical cord as it dried up over the days. So usually when you first see it, it's just white and floppy. But then as it dries, you clearly get to see the 3 vessels. And you actually have to be very tactful as to where you manipulate the umbilical cord so the baby can't grab it and rip it and tear it, and how you can position it. So we positioned the placenta down by her left hip, and as the umbilical cord dried, we would kind of like flatten it over her belly and down around her leg where she couldn't reach it to grab it. We wrapped it up in like these absorbent pads first, and we would chuck loads of salt on it, lavender oil, and we would change that on a daily basis. So changing nappies, changing the placenta, waterproof absorbent mat that was wrapped in. And then we would wrap it in like a nice South American blanket that we picked up from our travels when I was pregnant. And what was really cool as well is that no one wanted to hold a baby that had its placenta still attached because they were worried about dropping it. And so that meant we got to hold her all the time. But again, I would have just said, no, we want to hold her, like she's not to be passed around. We asked my parents not to wear strong perfumes and colognes and all that kind of stuff, like let her bond or connect with you. But my parents respected that, you know, we didn't want to be disturbed for 48 hours. Gav was amazing at bringing all my meals in. I must admit, I couldn't even go to the toilet, so I had a bucket in the room for a couple of days, full transparency. And I just slept a lot and just breastfed on demand. Gav was great at changing nappies as well. We were cloth napping from the get-go. I really, really need to do a part 4, like leading into this postpartum period, because I just want to focus on this Lotus birth and the painless birth. We only saw our midwife a couple of times. She was really supportive, but we felt good in ourselves. We didn't do the maternal health nurse thing, checkups, all that kind of stuff. I'll talk about that in part 4. But the Lotus birth was beautiful. We had 10 days where we didn't contact anyone. We didn't look at our phones, actually. We didn't look at our phones to see if there were any messages, but my friends knew, and I didn't actually open the phone to any messages of like, is your baby here? Is your baby here? Which I love that. And I think it's because I communicated my needs and wants really, really clearly. So, it was 10 days before, and probably slightly earlier, we felt ready to message people. My parents were responsible for letting Gav's parents know about the gender and the sex of our baby and how things went. I do remember my mum saying to me, was it painful? And I said, no. And she said, well, why were you making noise? And I think I rolled my eyes in the inside or maybe outside. And I was just like, I don't think I answered that. But you know how I was kind of saying I would answer the people where I could see their questions were coming from curiosity? I don't know. This felt like a little bit of a stab. So it was a primal birth. It was an ecstatic birth. It was a Lotus birth. I really credit Vipassana and my experience to giving and helping me in that experience. I was open, and this is something for me, is I'm open to any experience. I don't hold expectations. I hold intention. And it was beautiful. But what I really want to communicate here is there was so much communication with Gavin, with my midwife, with my family, with my friends, with Gav's family around what it is we wanted. I didn't want to be someone who had regrets because I did something because someone else thought I should do it. I always, always, for anything in my life, do things because I want to do it, even if it's not the normal, even if it's not expected. I'm sharing this and I keep on reminding you is like, don't do things because I did it. If it inspires you and you feel like it feels good for you, then go ahead and do it. It was an incredible experience. And I should add, one of my friends, when she was studying physio, I was part of her pain study. And I had to stick my hand in a bucket of ice water. And I was off the charts, lowest performer, worst pain threshold. Yet I had a painless birth. So anything can change. Plus, I say that, well, I don't really choose to stick my hand in an ice bath, but I choose to have this baby. And I do feel like she was a very conscious conception, conscious pregnancy, conscious birth. I wouldn't do anything differently. But the big thing is that this came with a lot of planning, intention, time spent around how do I want this? And, I remember presenting at this workshop a couple of times about pregnancy, birth, and beyond. And sometimes the workshops went amazingly smoothly. We had a variety of practitioners present. And sometimes there was so much pain projected from some members of the audience. And whenever someone says, well, I planned all of this and this is how my birth went, it's like, hang on, we need more than 5 minutes. We need like an hour to unpack this, because what are all the moving parts beforehand? I think there's so much opportunity of when things don't go the way you expect and you experience pain from it, is what is the opportunity in this? What is the deeper messages? And that is part of why I really emphasize doing as much emotional processing and work before you get pregnant, before you have a baby, because yes, there can be things like sleep deprivation. I'll talk about this more in the fourth trimester. Makes sense to make 4 parts in this podcast, right? There can be challenges that happen. And when we're responsible for looking after a baby, all of a sudden our own needs can go out the window. Our own sort of requirements to process emotions can get bypassed. And that's where I see a lot of things build up. So I did use my bleed stop herbs. I did experience mastitis, and I was so glad I had my liquid gold there, because this is one of those things that people often think, it'll get better, it'll get better. Why am I feeling so shitty? Because it's kind of like flu-like symptoms and painful breast. So glad I had it on me. There's a preventative dose and there's a treatment dose. And the only times that I actually got the feelings of mastitis was when I wasn't taking my preventative dose. So it was just a reminder. But I didn't want to be like racing around, seeing a herbalist, getting a script, all that kind of stuff in those early days. I'd happily spend the money on those herbs, and if I needed them, they were there. It's all about being in that present moment, not like having to search for solutions and outside things. So, Gav's just come to the window to tell me we've got to pick up Violet. I'm like, give me 2 minutes. I did use the milk flow herbs as well in that postpartum period, but I think if I follow my pattern of abruptly cutting these episodes, this is going to be about the 4th trimester. So main thing is Lotus birth, the preparation. I feel like I was a couple of years in preparation to get me to that point, and just communicating within the relationships with everyone that you've got around you. So I hope this birth story, Lotus birth, painless birth, Violet's birth story, helps you and supports you in your journey, perhaps inspires you. If it does, I'd love to know. We'll leave it there. Thanks for listening.